Ruth Klüger has seen things in her life that we today can never comprehend or truly understand. It is easy for us to look at her story, as well as the thousands of others who have lived through the period of the Holocaust, and we believe it as fiction, as we don't want to believe it was reality. Yet when it comes to the testimonies written like Ruth's, it gives us a very harsh return down back to earth. Ruth was born right around the beginning of the Nazis' take of power of neighboring Germany in her home country of Austria on October 30th, 1930. In her memoir, Still Alive, she writes about her childhood growing up during the changing anti-Semitic landscape of Austria, and how she as a child comprehended at an early age the magnitude of the situation that she and the rest of her family was in. Ruth spent her childhood traversing through the rapidly changing landscape, as well as her recounts on her relationship with her mother and her father at the time, and gaining new passion and courage for Jewish heritage as an internal counterattack to the rise of the systematic anti-Semitism in her country. While Ruth was 7 years old, Germany officially annexed Austria, and within a few years, Ruth and her mother were transported to their first camp. When reading Still Alive and Ruth recounting her experiences in the camps that her and her mother were stuck in, we are given an unexpected and possibly even uncomfortable insight to the first camp. It's surprising to see that the first camp Ruth and her mother arrived, Ruth was able to find some sort of enjoyment at her camp, even being able to build friendships. That is not to say that she did not struggle or face immense hardships, including the risk of starvation. But knowing that she was able to find a sense of happiness is both comforting and unsettling. It being the fact that due to Ruth's first-hand account, she introduces the gray area and how we outsiders perceive the Holocaust and people's experiences. It's very easy to assume what we believe we might think how Ruth and millions of others might have felt. But the power of Ruth's memoir and her story is that she is able to give perspective that we might not have wanted to digest previously, and moving forward, reshapes our mind on how we think about the Holocaust. After 2 years of being at her first camp, her and her mother are transported, as they are separated, to Auschwitz in May of 1944, but are quickly moved to another camp a month later in June. She tells us in her memoir that her passion and love for poetry kept her going and gave her enjoyment while in the camps. Towards the end of the war, her mother, and her foster sister escaped from the death marches into safety in Germany, gaining fake identification. There she was able to begin her journey into education, taking classes at a university in Germany before immigrating to the United States. Around this section of her memoir, Ruth warns us, the readers, of the feeling of comfort after learning that she survived and escaped the Holocaust, as she quotes, "How can I keep my readers from feeling good about the obvious truth of my story away from the gas chambers and the killing of fields and towards the post-war period where prosperity beckons?" She says that while she is alive, she is separated from those who are not, and from her father and her brother, and that this story continues on. The story strays away from the main focus of surviving the Holocaust to a life story of a survivor of war. After immigrating to the United States, we learn that Ruth continues her education while also struggling with being an immigrant to America, as well as her inner demons and psychological problems due to her time in the camps and the trauma she endured. We learn about her marriage turned to divorce and the souring relationship with her mother. We learn about her personal triumphs and her poetry writing, raising 2 kids, as well as her graduating university and becoming a professor herself. We learn of her avoidance of anything German or Austrian, the language, and the people. During an abroad program, she suffers a severe accident that renders her into a coma for a few days, forcing her to see the memories of herself in Austria before and during the war. She later references this in her memoir, that this was the accident that inspired her to write the memoir, as well as her self-realization that she can never escape the past, as she was trying to do so before her accident. She sees herself writing this memoir as if finally confronting her past, confronting the dead that she had been running away from. Ruth retired from teaching at the University of California in 1992, a little while before she wrote this memoir. Her mother passed away after her memoir was written, but before she translated the memoir into English in respect for her mother. Ruth herself passed away on October 5th, 2020 at age 88. One of the things Ruth introduces to us is to think about the politics of memory, how things are remembered and how history is written and seen in the future. As we learn in her memoir, Ruth repeatedly states her unwillingness to return to the camps, as she quotes, "Where the camp Auschwitz-Birkenau was located, and now is the museum that I won't visit," even mentioning the posting of her poems from Auschwitz in Auschwitz, although she requested for those not to be shown there anymore. She quotes again, "I never went back to Auschwitz as a tourist, and I never will. Not in this life. I am told that they exhibit my Auschwitz poems in their museums against my express wishes." While most people would be quick to assume and understand Ruth's reasoning for not wanting to visit the museums, she tells us her discomfort with visiting the museums lies with how the museums are handled and presented to us, how they are kept clean and neat, unlike the actual raw experience of Ruth and the millions of others who were kept those in the camps, as well as the lack of need to visit due to her own personal growth. The place which I saw, smelled, and feared, which now has been turned into a museum, has nothing to do with the woman I am. She also quotes, "They, as in the museums, don't take you in, they spit you out. Moreover, they tell you what you ought to think, as no science or art museum ever does. They impede the critical faculty." It is to be said that Ruth is not the only survivor or descendant of survivors with these opinions on the Holocaust museums and their effect on those who will be observing them. An article by The New Yorker in 2012 argues of the inadequacy of Berlin's memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe. A Holocaust memorial in Berlin argued by the author that without second glance, it would be difficult to tell if it is a memorial or not, as it could be considered as an art piece. Most of all, the author of the article argues that it doesn't even serve the function of what the memorial intends. Another article by the New York Times describes another Berlin exposition in a museum that struck negatively with Jews living in Berlin. We might wonder what the possible risk of inadequate memorials of the Holocaust might be. Eventually, there will be no more people like Ruth and the remaining Holocaust survivors left to share the first-hand accounts of the Holocaust. There will be no more people to give us insight and to be able to raise discussion on how we see the Holocaust and how we take in with us moving forward. Then we become the people who now have the history in our hands. And it will be our responsibility to write history for those who come after us, to learn from, and so on and so forth. And at that point, we will only have what was left behind by those who lived it. But if we go through these museums, what will we see, and how will we consume it? How will we learn from it, and eventually, how will others learn from us? Ruth's story is great in this aspect alone. She did not have to write the story, or at the least, she did not have to share it with the rest of us. But she did. And now that she has passed, it is our job to protect her memory and her history, along with the millions of others to be rightfully passed down. If we don't, however, what will be the repercussions of mishandled history?